Well, I was born in a hospital, but of course, as everyone who's of my generation was. But we lived in a place called Banaba, 406 Leach Lane, St. Helens, Lancs. And I don't know what the locals thought of Banaba, because I'm sure they weren't even able to say it. I'm sure they thought it was a female form of Bambi or something. But it was my dad's sort of way of showing that he was how will I say, a cultural nationalist over in England. And we spoke Irish at home over in England. So it was kind of. I was looking at the paper today and found out that a young woman who'd grown up in Sheffield speaking Irish has now been moved to a job in RTE, and I think that's wonderful. I think at last we're taking over the world. We who were dispersed and have come back.
Right, and you were dispersed because why?
There were no jobs in Ireland. I mean, it was part of, even for educated people like my parents. My mother had got a Gaeltacht scholarship to Cloishdida, and then another Gaeltacht scholarship to UCG, and out of spite almost put down lice, medicine, when Borgia, the nun who was teaching her, said, whatever you do, don't put down lice because it's too difficult. And so my mother, almost out of spite, did it, and then found herself loving her job, and then found there was no jobs in Ireland. So she went off to England, and my father, well, I don't know if he followed her, but they definitely kept in touch all the time they were in England, and eventually married. My mother was a GP in St. Helens in Lancashire, and my father was registrar in the Providence Hospital near Liverpool. And then after a few years, my dad decided really that he wanted to come back to Ireland. So he came back to Ireland, and then after a year or so, my mum came back. And in the meantime, they'd sent me down to the Gaeltacht because, if I was going to be back in Ireland, I'd want to have good Irish. And I thought the Gaeltacht was Ireland.
Really? But when you think of it, you said that you grew up in a family over in England speaking Irish. I mean, what did the people in England think?
Well, I mean, our next door neighbour was Mrs. Rigby, which is a real Eleanor Rigby, a real Beatles name, isn't it?
Right, yeah.
A real Lancashire name. Supposedly, my godfather, my Uncle Rory, says that he used to hold me in his arms, and I'd be blathering away at Irish to her across the fence, and she'd be saying, yes dear, yes dear. I think I wasn't even aware of the difference of languages at the time, but I think I became aware of language very early. It may be the fact that when I was 6 months old, my mum had to go into hospital, and she had TB in the spine, and she didn't come out till I was maybe 2 1/4 or something like that. And in those days, with tuberculosis, the idea was isolation, and she really did have a hard time. And this was her third bout of TB, and it was very serious. And the only thing that saved her was the fact that streptomycin had just come out. Well, had come out during the war and had become generally available, and so she was very ill for a long time. And I think that one of my coping mechanisms was language, because my dad was telling me recently about, he remembers, he said you would never stop talking anyway, he said. And he says that he remembered me before I actually could walk, because I was a late walker, about 20 months or something before I walked, but he remembers me sitting up on a high stool at about 18 months using the word excerpt. And he asked me, he was laughing, he said, this is so ridiculous, a child that age using the word excerpt. So he asked me, and what's an excerpt? And I said, supposedly, a bit of a story that's going to be continued next week.
What does that say about you?
Oh, that I was a television child right from the word go.
And tell me, how did your dad cope? I mean, obviously you were very, very young, but even in terms of the stories that you hear now about suddenly, the woman that he loves is gone into hospital, her third bout of TB, as you say, touch and go. And how many children do they have?
No, I was the eldest.
So you were the eldest. So there was younger children as well.
No, there were no children at that stage. I mean, I was. It wasn't until Mum came out of hospital afterwards that and even a year or two after that again that she had another child. So I was an only child for the first 4 years of my life. So I mean, that speaks volumes too. That kind of the sense of, well, everyone says it about only children, the sense of sort of being special, and also I think eldest kids are inclined to have it, the sense of being, I don't know, but, well, being a law unto themselves or something,
But I suppose in some ways Your situation was a little bit different from most kids because your mum suddenly was gone from you. From the age of 6 months up until, as you say, 2.5. Did your dad keep working?
Yes, he did keep working, and actually, one of the things he did to keep himself sane was do the Master of Surgery, which was, as well as having the fellowship and everything else, he did a Master in Surgery, which he did to keep himself sane, and I remember him at a very, very early age. Mum must have been out of hospital at the stage. He used to be practicing on the handle of the door, making knots with one finger, because that's what you have to do when you have to tie up people. You've got all these sort of things going on at the same time. And I remember one of my earliest memories, I think I was still in nappies, is of him practicing tying knots with one finger.
Wow.
With a string
that's right.
on the door handle. And he had, actually, she was from Dublin, somebody called Carmel, who was a live-in housekeeper who looked after me, basically. And a lot of the local women also were sort of used to bring me for walks and this and all. But I'd say it was solitary enough,
And still in all, for you, in terms of your language development, these people were all English minding you anyway for a number of years.
Yeah, so and that probably explains why I never developed Irish English. Even when we went to live in Nina, the rest of the family got a real Tipperary accent, but I never did. I always had English and Gaeltacht Irish, which
right. What kind of accent would you say you have?
I've mid-Atlantic now because I taught as an English teacher in Turkey for years, and so you end up so you're losing all the sort of more, I suppose, nuances of locality. Yeah,
right. And still in all, I wouldn't be able to place you.
Oh, I know a lot of people, English people, think I'm a New Englander, but no American would ever make that mistake.
Right.
No, English people can't place me either. It's great because the way they love to place you. Right. But that's the nice thing about being Irish. You see, you can only be placed geographically in Ireland by accent.
Right.
In England, you can be placed class and down to the last, almost 1,000 euros that your father made, by accent. And all you have to do is open your mouth. I noticed this when I was working in Turkey as teaching English in the university there, and these English girls would come over and they within one sentence of the newcomer opening their mouth, they would have placed them socially and ranked them socially. It was hilarious at some level, and they couldn't place us at all, which was great.
What's that about, though? What is that about, sort of that ability or that need to place people in a certain, not only a sort of a culture, but also sort of a socioeconomic background sort of origin as well?
Well, I'd say all human societies place people in different ways, but I think we place... Well, I don't know what's happening now in Ireland with all the new money and everything coming in, and the fact that a lot of non-Irish people are living, non-Irish nationals are living here. So I don't really know what's going to be the outcome of that. But until recently, what you really could do in Irish was, in Ireland mostly, was place somebody geographically. And I think that says a lot too. It says a lot for the fact that the old Irish local system of government, which was localised, we never really had a metropolis. I know there were high kings, but they weren't really. Everybody sort of got on with their own business in their own area. And so Irish society was very localised, and I think until very recently that was what you placed you,
Okay, I understand. And just getting back then in terms, so your mum gets out of hospital. And do you know as to whether she went back to work pretty much?
She did go back to work, but I do know that she felt that I didn't run to her and call her mommy, and she had a sort of a brace on at the time because her back was still weak, so she couldn't sort of bend down and reach me up. And I think it must have been absolutely Freudian. I mean, I can't really remember much about it, but it must have been, this woman, who's this woman who came and took my daddy from me, Sure. It must have been,
Right. Did you see her in that time that she was away?
Not that I remember.
Really?
No. Well, you see, that was, there was long before, Bowlby and even the sort of people who have now
talk about attachment and stuff,
and things
separation,
like that.
Anxiety.
These things didn't. No. I mean, these things weren't under consideration because they weren't part of people's, conceptual framework.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
You know, so
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So I suppose my father definitely spoke Irish to me, and so I suppose my mother language is, funnily enough, a father language,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it very complicated, I suppose. You know?
Or maybe straight as a die, actually.
maybe. You know?
And so, what age were you then when you actually came back to Ireland?
Well, we used to come back every summer because it was a big thing. I mean, we'd go to a place called Kerry, and we had a dog called Kerry. It was a Kerry Blue. Dreadful dogs, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I was very frightened of it, I think. But my dad was a very doggy man, so we always had a dog. And I still remember going up the gangplank from the Liver building, near the Liver building in Liverpool, and then to Dublin, and then the train down to Cork, and then we'd stay with my father's people there for a little while, and then we'd go down to Kerry. But we, at the time, stayed in my mother's house in Ballamore, and my two uncles, who were subsequently drowned, they were still alive, and so we stayed there. After they were drowned, then I stayed with my aunt over in Garretrant, in the parish of Fentry. I mean, the houses, you could see them across the bay, actually.
Okay.
And then when I was 5, when my dad had decided that we were coming back to Ireland, definitely, I think maybe at this stage Mum had 3 kids and she was on her own, and I think it must have been all too much. And I was farmed out to my aunt, who was her only sister. I mean, she had all brothers except for this one sister. And of course, they'd been through this awful trauma the year before of both my uncles drowning.
And what happened to them?
They drowned in a lobster boat. They had years later, 50 years later, it came out that my mother had sent him the money to buy it, and we'd never known that until maybe there about 10 years ago, when she wasn't well, and we heard we heard her saying to a woman. My brother and I happened to be just listening in, and she wasn't saying it to us directly at all. She said, 50 years ago today, my 2 brothers were drowned and I bought them the boat. And it was only then we realised what her connection was, and she must have felt terribly guilty about that all those years. She sent them the money to buy a boat because brucellosis had just come in, and they lost the herd. Right. And my uncle Eugene Owen, who had the farm, and my other brother Sean, other uncle Sean, who was his younger brother, who was a captain in the army, who was in the Irish jumping team and the army jumping team, and quite a character. They were out fishing with another man who was their fishing partner, and they had this boat that Mum had bought. It was a Nevogue a canoe, Curragh, and it had an outboard engine, which was very new in those days, and they had got the wrong diesel or the wrong whatever, petrol or something, and it stopped. And they had forgotten to bring the rowlocks.
Oh, sweet goodness. And they're the things where your rows actually fit into the side of your curragh, I know. So they actually couldn't row back.
So they couldn't go back, so they were waiting there, and a lot of people didn't think it was serious. They were under the cliffs, and people went in from the village, went into Dingle to get the cliff ropes, because there are such special things as cliff ropes, because the cliffs are huge down there. And they went in. It was actually my aunt's husband who went into Dingle to get the cliff ropes, and the man who had been in charge of them had gone off to England the day before with the key in his pocket by accident. You know, it was all one of these huge, terrible accidents. So then the whole parish almost congregated on the cliff and talked down to them, and people thought that the storm would pass and that they'd be all right, but they didn't. And then about 3 a.m, the boat broke up. Broke up, and a lot of people would still. It happened Old St. John's night, which is the 5th and the 6th of June, and to this day, if I'm down there around that time of the year, people will stop me and say, they remember my uncle's dying, etc. So it was really a terrible tragedy, and it left a terrible scar, I think, on the whole family. And also, I mean, you 2 young men,
What age were they?
Let me see, 56. Owen must have been about 27, and Sean was about 23.
Goodness me.
And it was really dreadful. So I think one of the reasons my mum came back to Ireland was because her mother went to stay with her, because after that she closed up the farm. She couldn't bear to look out at the sea, and my mum knew that Granny couldn't manage in England. She just it was all just too strange. So that was one of the reasons. And Dad was kind of pulling on her to go back to Ireland anyway. So I think for a while she was in a very invidious position, in the sense that she wanted to stay on in England, really, because she had a freedom in England that she knew she never would have in Ireland. In those days, the marriage ban and all existed, and you really, if you were a married woman, you had no right to work.
Right, and that wasn't existing in England at all.
No. Oh no, in England,
Okay.
she was at this stage the senior partner, because her senior partner had died and she bought out the practice. She was a senior partner in a large practice with 8,000 souls, and she was, doing what she was really good at. Right. And she often said years later that when she came back from England, she lost her identity, because her work, really, her being a doctor, was her identity, more so than anything else. And she did all sorts of other things too, and she did all sorts of, like I said, psychosomatic diseases and things like that in Ireland afterwards. But being a GP was really her really great gift and her identity. And so she lost her identity. And of course, in those days, again, words like identity just weren't part of the conceptual framework. So it was only maybe 30 years after that she was able to talk about that.
But it's interesting, though. Maybe you don't have the words, but I think your soul knows that
yeah.
something is missing.
Oh, definitely. Oh, I'm sure my mother knew dreadfully, and I think she suffered dreadfully. I think she was severely depressed for years because of that. Because she didn't have any outlet for what was an obvious talent, and it wasn't just a talent for clinical medicine. She was a marvelous diagnostician. I mean, a marvelous. She just had this knack. But also in the family, we've had way back. We had a granduncle of hers would have been called Tomás na Búcaí, and he was famous for being in the fairies, for travelling with the fairies. And he used to cure people of all sorts of things, and he had these charms and everything else that he used. And Mum said years later that what he was doing was sort of hypnosis.
Really?
Yeah, and she could see, how it would run in the family.
Goodness me. So she felt as though maybe some of that had been transferred onto her through
definitely,
generations?
But she was a healer as well. I mean, her gift with psychosomatic diseases is definitely proof that she was more than just a clinically trained doctor, that she also was a healer. And she had this, like I said, she had this diagnostic sense. She said, she used to say things like that she could, that she would say a prayer every morning when she'd start her rounds or going into the clinics or something. She'd say a prayer every morning that she wouldn't miss a serious disease. And she said that in all her 8 years in private practice and then afterwards in Ireland, that she never once missed a serious disease. And I said, how come? And she said, I could smell death.
Really?
And I'd say, she'd go into a house and she could, and I'd say, what did it smell like? And she said it would smell very cold, like the earth. And as soon as she went into a house and she felt this, or smelt it, as she said, she would get out, she would get that person into hospital immediately.
Really?
So it was
phenomenal.
It is uncanny.
Yeah. Sixth sense.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure of that. And like she said, it runs in the, it runs in the family. I mean, Tomás na Búcaí was doing this generations back.
Anybody else in the newer generations replicating anything?
Oh yeah,
like that?
well, everyone. One of my sisters didn't do medicine, but apart from me and her, and she, all the rest of the family are doctors.
Okay,
I mean,
right.
And just about everybody else and all the young cousins,
all doctors, all
doctors.
doctors.
And I was supposed to all set up to do medicine, and I even had physics and chemistry and everything else. But I actually wanted to do geography, so I did it in 5th year and got it out of the system and did very well. I mean, if I say so myself, I was very delighted with myself that I hadn't just let it go, that I'd actually
pursued something that was
somewhere.
important to you.
But then I had to do physics and chemistry, and I was whatever about chemistry, because I had a good memory and you learn off a lot of formulas in chemistry, but physics, my God.
There's a whole new story in that, but we won't even go there. We won't stress you out with the bloody thoughts of formulas and God knows what. I know. So you came back. So what age were you when you came back? Did you?
I was 5 when I was sent to Kerry, and I was 6.5 when I came back from Kerry, and then moved up to Nina. And Nana wherever I wander, as the locals call it, because of course that is the better pronunciation. Nana is Éanach, because it's Éanach Arvon. And
just for my own clarification, if you don't mind, so you were going back and forth to say your mum's family and staying there kind of summer times and stuff like that. And then you said you used the word you got farmed out to an aunt. How long were you with your aunt?
Over a year and a half.
And what age were you at that stage?
5.
So not only you didn't have a mum from the age of 6 months to say 2.5, and then suddenly she was gone again after once you reached 5.
Yeah, but I do think that's why I learned Irish, as it was a survival strategy, and it was imprinted on me probably more strongly than it would have been otherwise if it hadn't been so necessary. And so I don't know. Well, I suppose it is, but I wasn't hungry. I was warm. I was, I was well fed. I was quite spoilt in some ways. So, I didn't have any sense of hardship.
And so then they came back and they moved to Nina.
Yeah, and then that was where I realised that until then I thought that in England they spoke English, though we spoke Irish, right? But you spoke English, and in Ireland they spoke Irish. And then I moved up to Tipperary, and I remember one stage before we actually had the house or anything like that, I was staying with my dad in the hospital where he was a house surgeon, and the matron put me to bed in a cot like you'd have in a hospital. And she was speaking English to me, and I said to my father in Irish, "Can I have Golden Vansel out? Why is this woman speaking English to me? Isn't this Ireland?"
All right. Wonderful.
And I, severely confused at that stage.
Sure. So growing up in Nina, not too far from my own abode.
Where was that?
In Limerick.
Oh yeah, well then I went into Limerick to boarding school. So
did you? What boarding school did you
went to? Laurel Hill. Yeah.
I went to Laurel Hill as well.
Did you?
Oh, yes, I did.
Oh, well, you must have been after me then.
Maybe.
Yeah. No, I went to Laurel Hill because it was the nearest A school, and I loved the teachers. I understood the A school, but I wasn't boarding material, so the boarding bit was tough. I was. But I must say, it was a very, very good school. I'm reading A Land of Spices at the moment because I'm trying to write an essay about this poem I wrote when I was very young, actually half the age I am now exactly. And if I lived to be 100, I don't think I'll ever write as good a poem again. And it's frightening to think, that this thing doesn't get easier as you get older. So there I am trying to write about how I wrote this poem, La Bajida. And I do think the fact that I had read the night before Land of Spices for the first time in my life, because it had been banned in my time, had a lot to do with it, and it brought back that whole sort of 5 years of my life, which were very important. And
what was important about them?
Well, this sense that you were given great confidence in yourself. It never entered anyone's mind that you were a lesser person because you were a woman. On the other hand, on the contrary, you were expected to be how will I say, intellectually questioning and intellectually aggressive almost. And so when we would have, debates with Glenn Stoll, and I would say boys in this sort of superior way. The priest in Glen Stoll used to be very disturbed. But
the madams, the little madams in the A school.
Oh, absolutely, the absolute little madams.
Right.
And but I do think that was good for us. It gave you this great sense of aplomb and. What would they?
Confidence maybe as well of who you are and what you are. Yeah. Maybe
and
so.
no sense at all of being a second-class citizen.
Right.
Which I had to go to university to feel, and then to go to university, and then people in those days people didn't ask many questions in Irish universities, unlike say American universities. But when I would ask a question, I remember certain professors wouldn't actually hear it. But if a boy asked a question, it was immediately heard.
Isn't that interesting?
And it was the first time that this had hit me. So I'm so thankful for Laurel Hill for those 5 years of this, maybe this sort of world, maybe enclosed in some ways world, but secluded world, which, allowed you to, to grow without always be looking over your shoulder. You know?
Right. And obviously your parents had probably had a sense of who they were as individuals as well, because like that was something that presumably they had nurtured and sought for you as well by even sending you there in the first place.
Yeah, but the most important thing was that it was an A school. That was it was either that or the Brigidines, which was up the road the other direction, and because that was the nearest A school. But I think that was still. I think it was more the A school thing than anything else. Right. The fact, and the A school meaning an all Irish school. That's what I mean. I mean, it had nothing to do with ranks.
No,
it had nothing to do with rank. There was no ranking except that it was that much harder if you're doing things through Irish and all your as it was in those days, all your for instance, I still remember even geography. The textbooks were in English, and we used to have to write in the words in Irish on top of the.
My goodness me!
So that was kind of just made it that more complicated.
Sure.
But on the other hand, we did Latin through Irish and French through Irish and everything else, which was which was actually very good for us. I mean, it taught you lots. I mean, it taught me much better Irish than ever it taught me Latin. But I must say, I enjoyed Latin too. We had just very dedicated teachers.
Well, I tell you, when this interview is over, we are going to get heads together, and I'll have to talk to you about different nuns.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
But that is not for this interview, I don't think. What university did you choose to go to?
Then I didn't choose to go to, because in those days, I mean, you did what you were told, and sure. I would have loved to have gone to Trinity, but I was warned off it because Catholic girls didn't go to Trinity, and I had a 1916 scholarship which would have allowed me to go anywhere, except it didn't come through until I was already established.
Right.
I didn't get it for Irish actually. I got it for English and French,
right.
And it didn't come through until way into November. And at this stage, I was established in Cork, and I was sent to Cork because it had the best medical school in Ireland at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was supposed to be doing medicine. And the last minute, I changed my mind. And just when I went to sign on, I said, no, I'm not doing medicine, I'm doing arts. Which, was the first bombshell.
At home.
But I actually never regretted it, because I don't have the temperament, I don't think, for medicine. No, I would have taken too much out of me. I think it would have. I suppose maybe because, well, I'll tell you one thing that definitely turned me off it. My dad, I was always making excuses like, oh, but sure, I couldn't, how could I deal with dead bodies and everything else? He said, come in and watch me do an operation sometimes. So he was doing gallbladders or something one morning. So there I go in, and they get me all scrubbed up and everything else. And there I hop into the, and I faint. So the poor anaesthetist pulls me out. So I put my legs between my head between my legs, and then I take deep breaths for everything else. And then I feel such an idiot that I say, I'll go in again. So I walk in again, and I faint again.
Oh, sweet
and
God.
The poor anaesthetist pulls me out. Man, this happens about 4 or 5 times. At which point I said to myself, I think there's a message here.
I'm not sure what it is, but I think there is. Yeah, wonderful.
And I think on the strength of that, and also I'd won I'd won the European School Days essay and with a few others of us, and also the Alliance Française essay, and I'd got these trips to Europe and everything, and it all went to my head, and I decided if I'm going to be doing something for the rest of my life, I might as well do something that I have a knack for.
Right.
Obviously I had a knack for languages, and I didn't feel I had a knack for well, I didn't definitely have a knack for surgery. I mean, that definitely was the message.
But you must have been a bit of a bright box, though. I mean, you're talking.
I was insufferable. I was absolutely insufferable. I must have been absolutely. Insufferable. When I look back on it, but the way, total know-it-all.
Right.
Sort of very cheeky and. But I think that's great because you get the corners knocked out of you anyway. So, it's
that's
just as well to start off with a bit of...
Yes, with a big head, and then it'll get smaller rather than a small that just gets smaller and smaller. I think you're right. Your siblings, tell me about them and their reaction to their elder sister, who is all this bright box and smart lady who will drive everybody demented.
Well, you see... There's 4 years between me and the next, so it's like, and then they come like steps of stairs, sort of Irish twins almost for the next 4. So there's 4 years between me and my next, and then there's 4 of them. So I was very much the big sister, and I definitely, it was my job to put them to bed when I was 10 or 11. Until I developed breasts, we all slept in one big long room, and we used to have. Games. I used to put them to bed, and then we'd have these games called Lionies and everything else. And I'd be telling them stories and everything else, and it was wonderful. And then my breasts began to develop, and then my young brothers began to make smart remarks about it, and I got embarrassed. So I told my mother. So then I got a room of my own. But until then, I was very much the elder sister who, told him stories and, brought them, put him to bed every night. And loved it, really, actually.
Wonderful.
But I'm very much the elder sister, so I was away in Turkey then, around the place for 7 years, and then I came back and discovered that I had 4 brothers and sisters who were now adults, whom I had to get to know, because until then, when I knew them, they had been children, right, and so that was one of the really nice things about growing up.
Now you talk about Turkey. And what was a nice Irish Catholic young one going? You are Catholic.
Well,
you were brought up Catholic.
Brought up very, very,
very Catholic.
Very seriously Catholic.
Right,
I mean, and it meant a lot.
Right. But what was this nice, inverted commas, Catholic young one going off to Turkey? I mean,
I fell in love. I mean, that's basically.
You fell in love with what?
I fell in love with a man who happened to be Turkish, and so there we ended up going to Turkey. It was all very simple at one level and all very complicated at another level. And maybe that's what this poem La Bajida is all about. That after I came home one summer from Turkey, I must have been about 27 at the time. Maybe I was younger. No, I was 26 at the time. And I'd left Laurel Hill at, whatever it was, at 17, so it was 9 years previously. And then I read this book, The Land of Spices, which recreated Laurel Hill for me so totally, and I did basically ask myself, what the difference between in 9 years between the me of 17 and the me of 26, and I mean it was just the abyss that I'd sort of grown up between those different people, and I really think that was something very, very deep that I hadn't, that sort of hit me all of a sudden, and that created the poem, but that I haven't actually quite addressed conceptually even yet. That
abyss you haven't sort of.
I spent all my time sort of building bridges across it, but I maybe kind of maybe I've always smoothed over, like you smoor over a fire, to keep the flame down, but to keep the flame intact at the same time.
But can you remember, like, the first time that you went to Turkey? It must have been so different culturally. I mean, nowadays we can get on a plane and we can be there in a couple of hours,
Oh, it was.
But psychically it must have been very different.
Oh, in those days we went by, they called it the Orient Express, but it wasn't the Agatha Christie Orient Express, nor was it the great sort of luxurious Orient Express that exists now, and something like it wasn't even an idea in the mind of some smart travel operator at the time. It was just a mix and gather of all sorts of different compartments of 2 trains, one that started in Munich and one that started in Paris, and we met up with the one that started in Paris in Milan, and then we went on to Belgrade, where the 2 trains came together, and then you had to go through a lot of trouble trying to get a couchette. And I remember being at my husband and this Turkish girl we'd met with went off to get a couchette, because if you didn't get yourself into the right compartment in Belgrade, you'd be sitting all the way to Turkey. So they knew the score, so they went off to do that, and I was stuck with all the luggage, and I was 6 months pregnant at the time, and I got to chapter 62 of this Türkische Sprachlehrer für Ausländer, or whatever it was. It was this, which I had to teach them. Oh yeah, I had to basically learn a bit of German so that I could learn a bit of Turkish. But it's the only book. It was a book that was written actually in the 30s by a man from the Institute of Oriental Studies in Austria, and it is as yet the best Turkish book, How to Learn Turkish, I've ever come across. It also exists in French. It's the same book, but I don't know if there's even as yet an English translation of it, because it's the only book that is as logical as the Turkish language. And all the other books, like Teach Yourself Turkish and everything else, are a dead loss compared with this book, which is as logical as and I'd reached chapter 62 at this stage, which was something like the past, I don't know, the past, the reported past conditional or something, something really,
okay.
I know, but I happen to like grammar. I mean, that's maybe why I like Latin. Let's face it, I think grammar is like algebra. I mean,
really?
it's just wonderful.
Oh no!
I'm still like that. I mean,
really?
I'd spend out languages I don't even know. I'd be trying to work out. I'd be trying to. That must be the dative, and that must be the this, and that must be the that. No, I know it. It was just. It's like some people play I don't know, play
different instruments and stuff. And they have the talent for that, and for others it's like no. But this is one of your fortes.
It must be, but it's something I get a genuine pleasure from. People, if you say, "What do you get pleasure from?" and I say grammar, people say, "Huh?" It's true, and that doesn't mean I'm maybe always very good at it, but I like working it out. Yeah, and. How did I get on to
this? So you're on chapter 62. Fair dues to you. That's some whacking read on this long journey. So obviously they've been gone for a while.
I've been. Well, I was working on it a bit in Holland beforehand, but I was on chapter 62. So they were gone for a long time. So I made a perfect Turkish agglutinative sentence, which it took me about 5 years to be able to ever make again. But out of sheer terror, I said, "Kocam geleceğim diye gitti gelmedi," which means my husband, having said he would come back soon, went away and hasn't come back yet.
Right. Okay.
And that's all done with 5 words.
Okay. It's even hard to say it in English.
I know. It's much more difficult to say in English because you have to make all these you've got to make all these different subclauses and you can do that in 5 words in Turkish.
Amazing.
But they're highly inflected and highly, they've all these postpositions and prepositions and everything else. But you can do that in 5 words in Turkish, and I did it in 5 words in Turkish. Obviously, kind of understanding myself as I said it. But it took me about 5 years before I could make a sentence like that again.
Wow.
But I mean, there again, I think a language to the rescue.
Absolutely. Again, another pattern emerging.
Yeah.
He came back to you, obviously. He found you
he found me
on the train. Yeah, right.
And then we continued our journey, and we arrived I remember we were 18. The train was 18 hours late, and the extended family who had come to collect us had come early in the morning and then gone home and gone to bed and come back again for us.
Yeah, meeting your in-laws for the first time.
Well, I mean, I'd met my mother-in-law in Zurich actually once. She'd been in Zurich and we'd gone there to visit her. But definitely I was really disappointed to her because the second day she hands me this big thing of tray of string beans, and she says, "Cuz bunlara temizle, prepare these for cooking, girl," she says to me. And I didn't know what a string bean, one end of a string bean from the other. If they'd stood up and talking to me. Yeah, I mean, for me, Heinz beans were the nearest, 62 varieties were the nearest I'd ever come to anything like that. So it was definitely a severe learning curve. And you see, because I didn't have a family behind me, because our crowd we were estranged at the time, let's put it like that. But I didn't have a family behind me in a very strong kinship system. I didn't therefore have any power behind me. Okay. So in a way, people could walk over me roughshod in a way that they couldn't if my family, if the presence of my family were more obvious. Right.
I understand. So how did you actually assert yourself then?
Well, first of all, I produced a child. I say I produced a son. My husband says you produced a child. He says it wouldn't make any difference. I say it would. He says I think he still knows nothing about his own culture, that I produced a son. So first then I became the mother of a son. So that gives me one up in the sort of pecking order. Mm-hmm. And then I got a university job. Teaching English in the Middle East Technical University. And, Turks have always had sort of a separate category for intellectual women. I mean, a lot of the sultan's mothers started off as basically as female slaves, but ended up as the mothers of sultans, and very, very powerful women, and very, very educated. And so there's the whole category of of kind of educated woman, and in the Republic, women have had vote in Turkey since the 20s, and they've had the same pay for the same work since the 20s. Now, I remember the shock of my very first paycheck in Ireland in I was 20. I was doing the dip 1972, where I got my paycheck, and it seemed like there was a lot of money taken out of it. And then I looked at a young man who had the same amount of hours teaching as me. We were doing our dip, and his was more than me. And I said, "How come you've got more than I have? Have you got more hours?" And he said, "No, we both got 12 hours." And I said, "How come you've got more than me?" And he says, "Because I'm a man and you're a woman." And you got 80% in those days. This was the law that you got 80%. And then I remember my very next paycheck was actually when I was in the university in Turkey, and I got the full whammer. So I mean, you know, things aren't quite what they seem to be, you know.
Right. So in some ways, in respect to sort of gender identity and issues, they were maybe more advanced.
They were, and in many ways, I was very, very well treated in Turkey. Like, number one, like I said, once I'd gone through the sort of the original, the string beans stage and everything. Right. And had produced, like I said, was a mother of two small children and had a university job. I mean, I was a sort of lady teacher. And so I came back, you know, with this. I was quite I was able to commandeer myself into a position where I'd be special. You know, this is obviously goes back to being the only child and something, you know. And there I got myself in this position, and then I went back to give it all up. Went back to West Kerry to be a poet in Irish, and then and was treated like dirt. And then and everyone saying, "Who do you think you are, Nuala?"
And whose voice resonates in your head when you hear that? Who do you think you are, Nuala?
Actually, my sisters.
Finish off the sentence. Who do you think you are, Nuala?
Well, I don't know. I think I'm me, but you know, warts and all. But obviously, I must obviously think I'm somebody. You know, and that probably I must have been unbearably bumptious. You know, I've had, like I said, that corners knocked off me, but I'd say I'm unbearably bumptious. You know,
you're very hard on yourself.
Well, I don't know. I think all Irish people are. I think that's part of the Irish Catholic thing, to be hard on yourself.
Now, I'm thinking, you know, you left Ireland and you went over to Turkey. And you stayed there for 7 years. Is that what you said? 7 years, long time.
Well, it's a 7-year itch. Either you stay 7 years or 14, or you stay forever. You know.
Really? Is that it? Okay.
I do think there's a 7-year itch. Right. I do think there's them. Now you know the way they found their circadian rhythms and everything else. I'm sure that they'll develop a 7-year rhythm in the human body as well.
Yeah,
you know?
Maybe they will. But you decided then to come back. Tell me about sort of the decision to actually, you know, leave your job and leave your husband's culture.
Oh yeah, and sell my furniture so I could get the ticket home and everything else, and bring the two kids and successfully traumatise them. Even if I'd set out to do that, I couldn't have done it better. And of course, repeated my own. You know the way you repeat without knowing it.
Yes,
your
absolutely.
own. Like I sort of, withheld their father from them in a way, the way I hadn't had a mother or something like that.
Right.
I've done that, you know, to two small children.
He stayed behind.
He stayed behind because he had work to do, and then he was going to come, but the work took about a year. So my daughter, who was 2.5 when she arrived in Ireland, she didn't talk for a whole year, and when her dad turned up, she got into his arms, and for 3 whole days she spoke Turkish that I didn't know she had. Babacım, 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 and told him all that had happened to us in the previous year.
Goodness me. And she hadn't spoken at all?
Hardly. And I thought she was just going to be a late speaker, because this is true. When they were all late speakers, but then they spoke in perfect. Then she was a late speaker, but then she spoke in perfect sentences, which I think, you know.
So it was like an elective mutism, inverted commas.
In a way, yeah.
In some respects,
which would have been her way of
coping. In some
yeah,
ways,
but also her and also her way of punishing me. Which is, you know, fair enough, because I took her dad from her in a way.
Yeah. But I don't think the decision must have been light for you to come back, or was it an easy decision?
It wasn't, and I mean, but I was very driven. I couldn't have done it in my 30s. I mean, I couldn't have broken up a family like that. I could never have done it again. I mean, but I definitely couldn't have done it later on. But I think at the time I was very driven. I decided that actually I chose changing horses in midstream. I didn't want to be teaching English for the rest of my life. I didn't want to be an expat, just like my parents, maybe my father, you know. I mean, I can see a repeating pattern. I didn't want to be an expat. I want to go back to Ireland. I want to go back to Ireland on my terms.
And your terms being?
I was going to go back to Ireland as a writer.
As a writer.
As a poet in Irish. And I had been publishing. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, you see, that's the bit that I left out about, say, when I was in Cork, the whole poetry lark. That all started. I actually won a prize in the Irish Times before I went to college, even, and I got £3 as a
£3.
Yeah, which in those days was a lot of money.
You know,
a prize and a poem in the Irish Times, which is, you know, a big deal. And then I went into college, and I was part of this literary group called we brought up this. It was a broadsheet in those days called Inte. And I was the token woman, basically. I'm not in the first Inti because I didn't have a poem when they came to ask for one.
What's Inti mean?
Inti means, actually, it's a rude...
Go on.
Yeah, it is actually rude. It means into her.
All right. Okay.
Which is, but it's a double entendre. It's what the islanders used to say when they'd be going home. Rhyme into.
Right.
And it has this double entendre as just about every second sentence in Gaelic speech has when people are in good form. I mean,
Really?
not as a double entendre, but triple and quadruple entendre. You
Really?
see these little old ladies, that you would think butter wouldn't
Butter!
wouldn't melt in their mouth. And the quadruple entendre, that's going on is just panic. And it's what makes...
There's a richness, isn't there,
it makes
really?
it so funny.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's not vulgar because nothing is said outwards. So it's actually hilariously funny and very natural, and that's the kind of Irish I love. But I got involved with this group, and I was the token woman. And the first, like I said, I didn't have a poem in the first issue of Inti because I just didn't have one when David asked for them. Michael David, who unfortunately died this year, and I flogged it in my high boots and fun for around college, though, because that's what I was good enough for, But in the second Inti and subsequent Intis, I was very much, I was present.
Involved in the whole thing, yeah. So in actual fact, were you writing poetry and other
poetry? But there
bits and
wasn't a
pieces
damn
over-
thing that I wasn't involved in. I was involved in. I was in drama. I was my first year in college. I was in and out of plays from the second week, and then my second year in college, I remember translating the Bald Prima Donna from French into Munster Irish and putting it on for the Cócadramh. And then at about a week before I was going to go on, all my cast ran away, and then I had to go out in the high roads and by roads and bring in another cast, and they were under rehearsed, and they all corpsed on the stage, and you can't imagine. And I directed it. I directed and everything, and at the same time, I was involved in a play. I was the main character in Yerma, a translation of Lorca's Yerma. And we were under rehearsed, and the Sean O'Maracu, who was that I was supposed to be killing right on the stage, he wouldn't die. And I kept on saying to him, "For Christ's sake, you're supposed to be dead."
This is Sean O'Maracu that we see on television, is it? Is it the same guy? Oh, right, okay. But he wouldn't die for Nuala anyway.
He wouldn't die. No, he wouldn't die on the stage. And I was supposed. It was hilarious.
Right.
At that point, I realised I wasn't an actress, because there was one point in the Yerma play where she holds her breasts and she says, there are these breasts full of milk and I have no child to give them to, and everything else. And there I am at 18 holding my breast on the stage and doing this and being so embarrassed I thought I'd die. At which point I realised I'm not an actress, because if I were an actress I would have been able to overcome my own personality to the extent that I'd be so much in character that it wouldn't bother me. But I suppose it was a kind of a hard thing for an 18-year-old.
I'm not convinced, actually. I actually agree. I think for an 18-year-old, I think no matter who you are, unless you're Britney Spears, who doesn't mind talking and singing in front of everybody, I think most kids would probably have had some embarrassment around.
Anyway, it cured me of acting. So.
Right, all right. Thanks be to God, says she. And so, were you writing when you were over in Turkey?
Yes.
Okay.
I started a diary first. I have the diary going on still. Still in longhand. I suppose I'm on, from volume point of view, volume 56 or 7 or something at the moment. Though.
Wow.
So these big. Well, what do they call them? The table-sized diary.
Yeah, the real
format.
A4 size one. Yeah, okay.
Diary
and
format.
you're on to 50 what?
I think I run out because I lost one. One was lost. Aaron lost one on me, and I can't. A while back, and
she's still giving out about this.
I'm very annoyed. I'm very annoyed. And between Galway and Dublin, how they can lose a case between Galway and Dublin. And anyway, this and it's the first time since 1972 that I lost a notebook.
Okay.
So it's a really big deal. Okay.
And
so because of that, I can't remember what number that was. So I can't remember but I must be up in volume 59 or something at this stage.
Wonderful, gosh.
But it's in written the most in mostly. Well, when I started this in boarding school, actually, I wrote this diary in code, in the sense that I had names for all the nuns and everything else, and I wrote it in Irish. And this was a way, because there was one nun who was mistress of studies who didn't like me and I didn't like her, let's put it to put it mildly. And there was no privacy. That's one of the things I didn't like, that they'd open up your diaries and open up and there was no sense of privacy or anything else. But she didn't have any Irish, so I wrote the diary in Irish and in code. And betting on the fact that the one nun who had enough Irish, who was our Irish teacher, she was a lady to her fingertips, and she wouldn't do that.
Lower herself to that type of thing. Yeah. And so I just lost my train of thought there.
This is about writing and how
Yeah.
I started writing as this way of creating space for myself in a situation that I found unbearable, and that I couldn't really complain about, because if I were to complain about it, they'd send me off to Closhdeeda, where my mother was, and which seemingly was worse. So I mean, it was one of these no-win situations. So I created a space for myself.
Sure.
And the writing became this space of freedom.
And continues today?
Oh, yeah.
Do you still write in Irish?
Yeah.
And are you somebody who's kind of, it's like a religion in some ways, there's a space every day given away to this writing, or in some ways the odd couple of days would go by, you say, oh God, I better catch up, and it's a bit of a pressure?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, at one stage, I was so disciplined that I would do 30 hours a week. So many hours 5 days a week, or 6 hours 5 days a week, or failing that, make it up at the weekends.
Okay.
But that would also include going into the Department of Folklore in the afternoons and doing research and everything else. But it used to be, I was so well disciplined that I was 30 hours a week. But then I had a really bad depression a few years back, and I'm not up to par yet. At the moment, I'm managing 20 hours a week.
Right. That's still a phenomenal amount.
But you've
writing.
got to put in. I mean, I'm not writing. I'm sitting on my desk. I'm applying seat of pants to seat of chair, and I'm, going through dictionaries, or I'm working on something, or I'm translating something, or I'm and that's what that's what you have to do.
Sure.